So welcome back, stranger.
Thank you.
Who are you?
I feel like I've been away for a while.
I've done 3 guest podcasts on the trot, but by popular demand...
My inbox has been, like I say, it's hard to manage.
I know. The mailbag
It's been hard to manage.
Has been full.
But yeah, I appreciate the love and support from everybody.
Yeah,
just,
so
big shout out.
So it's a good old Dave and Rich, Dick and Dave.
Comedy
back
double
on the
act.
road.
Comedy gold.
Now, listeners may also notice that it sounds a bit different as well this week.
It does. I've bled for my cause today.
You've been wielding the drill.
I've been wielding the drill.
And we've been hanging up acoustic blankets all around us. So we're getting rid of a bit more of the reverb in the room.
It's all part of the continuous improvement journey of the podcast, isn't it?
It is.
So those listeners who have been with us from the start will have noticed some rather seismic changes over the past year or so.
Yeah.
That's just part of...
And it is now just over a year. Last week was the anniversary of our first one. Episode
green
48 or so.
Sitting there, all scripted.
Yeah, it was back in the day. And now we just
rock
talk
up
about it off the cuff.
Podcast rock stars.
Let's start the podcast. So hello and welcome again to the SME Growth Podcast from Wellmeadow. I'm Dave Parry, and back by popular demand is Rich Buckle.
Hello, good to be here again.
Rich. So here we are again in our weekly set of news and items and bits and bobs that we think might be interesting to small and medium-sized companies looking to grow. And we're now into our second year. Last week's episode was our first anniversary.
Who'd have thought? From humble origins.
Remember when we set out, we said we've got to at least do 21 episodes.
Well, we set out to do 3, didn't we?
Well, that was the first.
We set out to do 3. I think 90% of podcasts get to 3 episodes.
Yeah, and no further.
And then...
and then wasn't it 99% don't get past 20 episodes?
Don't get past 21 or something, or 20.
Something like
20, yeah, so we went for 21.
Yeah.
And now here we are.
And it just goes to show if you do something enough times, it becomes habit. And it was, at the beginning, a bit trickier to make sure that we made the time each week to do it, but it's routine now, isn't it? It's just part of our routine each week, record a podcast.
Yeah, it helps us create a load of content, helps us think about things a bit differently.
Yeah. So I thought, today we're going to talk a little bit about, on the selling side of things, there was some interesting research we've been reading recently about what style of selling works better and less well, particularly in the professional services sector, but that's triggered some research into B2B as well. So we've got both of those subjects to talk about. But I thought maybe just as we get into our new year, our second year, add a new mix up to our format and have a little bit of a business news roundup as part of the opening of our podcast.
Cue the jingle music. Imagine some kind of like dun 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 dun.
Yeah. So, there's no point in us trying to recreate what the BBC and other outlets do well, but I thought for an SME focus, what matters? And the first thing announced this morning, we've got productivity numbers released, which are 0.0000 growth for the last quarter. So we're on the very edge of 1 month of dipping negative. Mm-hmm. And it seems to be balanced across all sectors. And just after the podcast was recorded last week, the MPC voted to keep interest rates the same. So I think it looks that the higher interest rates at 5.25 seem to be biting and everybody's sort of calming down a little bit.
Yep.
The only thing I balance that with is that in some board meetings recently, whereas there has been a bit of nervousness selling in B2B with customers holding back on purchases, that now seems to be freeing up. And I think people are coming up towards the end of the year, knowing the budgets start again in January. Suddenly purchase orders are flowing again. So whilst that data is always backward looking, I think maybe there's a bit more optimism.
I heard a similar thing. I was on my monthly call with our HubSpot consultant lady the other day. Mm-hmm. As you know, we are HubSpot partners. But she was saying that a lot of partners are reporting kind of quite a bit of growth and new projects coming on board, and that seems to be a theme as well, so that sort of backs up that.
It's been quite a few months, but I think it may be turning. So what have you got? What news have you heard about?
Well, I just have to flick my phone open to get the stats, but I was reading this morning about, if I go to my news page, some interesting things about productivity as well. Would you believe that the cost of scrolling on the phone and checking social media during work hours is costing the UK economy approximately 20 billion in
billion.
lost productivity.
Wow.
So
That's like half the defence budget or something. We'd have to look that up, but that's a lot, right?
That's a lot. So
what's the solution to that? Do we ban scrolling, or do we just accept that that's part of the new normal?
Well, I guess it depends what you're looking for, isn't it? I mean, there's a certain element of our jobs where we're checking things out on phones and things like that, researching, but
you get distracted.
Well, they said the Distracted Economy report reveals that 83% of people admit to being distracted during in-person meetings.
Mm.
I haven't got a clue what you just said, but but yeah, and 85 rising to 85%, which during online meetings. I mean, I would have thought online meetings would have been almost 100%, but
depends if the camera's on or not.
But there we go. Yeah. So so it's a kind of interesting productivity stat there.
Now, the other one I came up with, I think needs an airing, is the strike in America for the Hollywood actors, as looks like it's finally coming to an end. And the bit that caught my eye isn't the $1 billion extra package for all the background actors and the streaming rights that they were going for, but it's the bit about AI.
Okay.
And they're very worried that because actors' voices and likenesses can be very readily sampled now and recreated, they were looking for some protection on what happens if their likeness and voice is then used in other productions. Do they still get their royalties for that? So details haven't been released about how they're going to protect that, but apparently a resolution has been agreed upon. So I look forward to seeing what they do. But I thought that sort of has implications for all of us, really. Imagine if your website output is being sampled and used in some chat GPT output or something, or even your likeness could be used. Someone could be pretending to be Richard Buckle.
That's terrible.
Giving
terrifying
sagely advice on something.
Well, I've got someone that's using my address at the moment to register their car, so the saga continues.
One step away.
One step away from. But no, it's an interesting thought, isn't it? And I think it's that the blurring the lines between what's real and what's not real.
Yeah,
and
I think the biggest worry that all SME owners have to worry about is the fraud risk.
Yeah.
Especially because you and I are putting our voices out on the internet every week like this, then we could easily be sampled. Someone could pretend to be me, ring up our accountant and ask for a bank transfer, and possibly do that quite convincingly.
They'd have to know the code word, though, wouldn't they?
Well, we talked about that earlier. We need a code word to tell our accountant.
Yeah.
But you'd have to start thinking about all these new things now. Just relying on recognizing a phone number and a voice is no longer enough.
And I guess you could even do it with a video call, couldn't you? You could have a Zoom call with somebody.
The way it is.
And sample their image and their voice. And
so there's some updates on what's going on in the world. I think we'll bring some more updates on all the various AI things every time we see them, really, because it's so fast moving. We thought originally we'd do an episode on it every 3 months or so, but it's just too much happens.
Although I did see something the other day where they were talking about, is ChatGPT going to kill off all these other AI startups? Because a lot of AI startups are just a wrapper around OpenAI's API. And as OpenAI, ChatGPT keep building up the capability that's native, then a lot of these other AI
I'm
startups.
a Plus members now. I'm a Plus payer, pay my $10 or whatever it is a month for ChatGPT, and it now is researching the internet every time you ask a question. So whereas it used to come up with that annoying, I'm only programmed up until whatever the date was, I think it had got up to January 22 or something. Now it does a live search. So I asked it some questions the other day, and it showed you the list of websites that it was looking up, and then it consolidated all of that input and came up with its answer. We're still not crediting it enough. I think it does it a bit, but if it crawls our website and produces something, let's say on marketing or board meetings, you'd like to think you were getting the credit for having come up with that original content.
Yeah, but not.
And maybe they will. Okay, good. So what we're going to talk about this week then? You kick off, because you found this article in our favourite publication, or one of them.
One of them. So I was just scrolling through, having a coffee the other day, reading the latest Harvard Business Review, which is a very good publication. Highly recommend.
Yep.
And I just happened to come across an article about what today's rainmakers do differently. And it's largely focused around kind of business development within professional services firms. And it was quite interesting to look at it and think, well, there's some things here that as soon as I read it, I thought, well, there's a couple of things here that I can do personally that I could change. But also this would be a great topic just to go through on the podcast, because I think it's relevant for a lot of businesses.
Well, you got me to read it, and I must admit, when I started, I absolutely saw what you saw in it, which is it's quite impactful, really, when you think how many people we know sell.
Yeah.
And before anybody listening turns off because they think this is all about professional services, there's an allied piece of research done on B2B selling generally, which I'm also going to refer to from another article that Harvard Business Review published a few years ago. But let's start off with this professional services research then.
Yeah, and I think it probably applies as well to other SMEs, like you say. But there is that, we've seen it before as well, where people have spent time honing their skills, getting their expertise, building their client base, and maybe up until 5 or 10 years ago, that worked well as a strategy to have that loyal client base and to have that trusted advisor kind of status, and there just seemed to be a lot more kind of loyalty maybe within the world. And part of the tenet of this article is to say that's changing.
Yeah.
And because of that, the approach that people have to take to business development has got to change with it, otherwise you're going to get left behind. So one of the things that to sort of set the scene, they said sort of 5 years ago, they would say that 76% of buyers prefer to buy from their sort of trusted partner. And that was kind of based on just years of experience and relationship and all of that.
Yeah, and if you'd have asked me to guess that number, I'd say that was true today. If you'd said how many buyers tend to go to their usual supplier, at least 3/4 I would have thought for those sorts of services you consider professional.
So they're saying today that figure's down to 53%, and they reckon over the next 5 years that will drop to 37%.
So already the 53 for me was quite a surprise. I thought, really? Half of stuff? If you think about accounting, surveying, law, any consulting of any sort, that type of, all of that, 50% would rather scout out and go to tender or look out a recommendation from another supplier.
And so I think whilst that I started thinking about that and I think, well, all of a sudden everyone starts thinking, oh my goodness, is that a big threat?
Oh, well,
but I actually
it's as much an opportunity. Right? Well, it depends what type of mindset you are.
Yeah.
And I think there's a number of firms we know that should definitely be seeing that as a threat because they're not agile enough and they perhaps, they're not looking at these things. They'll only realize too late that the way people buy has changed. But for all those firms out there of whom I like to think we count ourselves in their number, we are looking at, that's a massive opportunity.
Absolutely. And I think, the more you can, not to hark on about AI again, but just have that mindset of what's new technology out there? How can you kind of embrace all of this kind of mindset of innovation, change? This is a shifting landscape that we're sitting in here.
Yeah.
Like we say, there was just I read it and thought, there's some really interesting kind of opportunities here for SMEs. Maybe a lot of this is maybe talking about larger professional services firms, big law firms, big accounting firms, big consulting firms. So I think for SMEs who have got the right mindset, the right toolkit, the right people around, this now presents some massive opportunities.
You can now break into what you might previously regarded as a closed shop.
Yeah.
If you weren't in that local networking group or you went to the right school or whatever it may have been, or just having been in business for 20 years, it's a kind of stickiness.
Yeah.
And if that's fading so that new starts can get in, and if you've got a better value proposition, you might actually get a hearing. Or an airing.
So I suppose you could say there's now, it would appear from just taking this data at face value that there's an opportunity for SMEs to get their foot in the door, but you've got to get in the doorway, right? And that's what the article was about. How do you get?
Yeah, that's right.
How do you get there?
Interesting research then. The way it did it interviewed 100 C-suite buyers and thousands of professional services partners to work out how they sell what they do. And they, by asking lots of questions, they categorized people into one of 5 types of seller. And they used the benchmark that they were trying to find out, trying to get it so that a fifth of their sample population of the partners fell into each of the 5. So they're trying to get an equal spread of 5 types, rather than coming up with anything that's too esoteric and unattainable. And the classic one, which I recognized first, was their first one called the expert, where someone relies on the fact they've just got very deep knowledge and expertise and experience in a subject. They don't need to really go out there and sell, in inverted commas, because their expertise will just get talked about. They won't even necessarily go on LinkedIn and talk about it or do seminars. They'll just quietly go about their business, doing their work, and the work comes in.
Yeah.
And as they were saying in those stats, that used to work, but less so now.
Yeah.
And that probably accounts for an awful lot of professional service people that we've met over the years, just being very good at what you do and not doing any marketing, but they're still busy.
And that's what you tend to see in many professional services, or particularly legal firms that we've worked with, is that the busy expert people who are good at what they do, tend to become the partners, don't they? And then that's kind of they've got all that. That's how it works. So
then I'm tempted to lump the next three together just in the interest of time. But the other three categories are confidants, where they tend to keep their contacts very close to the chairs, don't really share it amongst other parts of the firm, and build sort of close friendships.
Yep.
That's one. The debaters who challenge ideas all the time, and they're quite unsettling. Always questioning the way something is being bought and all that sort of thing.
Yep.
Fine. And then the realists who say, well, of course, you don't need to use me at all. You don't have to do that if you don't want to, and almost unsell the product.
Yeah.
And all those things, similarly to the experts, were all found to be having a negative correlation to eventual outcomes when they did the research.
Yep.
And I thought that was astonishing. 4 groups out of 5, 80% of the selling styles of professional services ended up being not as powerful as not doing anything at all, and nowhere near the fifth one. So what's the fifth one?
Fifth one is called the activators.
Right.
And they are the people that are building their networks, predominantly through social media, but also or LinkedIn, things like that, but also looking for those opportunities. And one of the things that struck me as I was reading through it was that just the amount of time, I think a combination of time and discipline in terms of consistency of focus on business development activities. So they're absolutely carving out very, very intentional time during the week to focus on these business development activities. But also there was a kind of a lot more collaboration with other people. There's none of this kind of, these are my clients, I'm holding them.
Yeah, they'd rather pass a referral on, even if it's not within their firm.
Yeah.
And they build up a reputation. And their research showed that for someone who was strong on this scale of the activators, they converted 35% more of the opportunities they were faced with than someone who was maybe an expert or a realist.
Yeah.
There was another aspect of what they did as well, not just the carving out dedicated time to do networking and getting out there and building their network, but it was that one that really struck a chord when we were discussing it in the kitchen the other day, which is if you read something that's interesting and you know someone in your network that might benefit from that, single them out and send it across to them just as a favor. Almost act as their personal curator. So you take it upon yourself to keep scanning the horizon because they're busy down in the engine room, and send them stuff that only you know that they will be interested in. Don't send them everything.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between sending a newsletter out to everybody with all of your thoughts and news and updates on it, because it's just too much for people to take on board. Get everybody that receives an email from you used to the idea that if you've decided to send an email to them, it's going to be worth reading because you've thought about it and it's relevant to them.
Yeah.
Now, there's probably things you can do in your CRM to help you do that.
Absolutely.
But that sounded like a very powerful approach to me.
Yeah, and I think that would particularly work for if you had particular people that you were focused on. Excuse me, choking there. I think the regular insights newsletters thing is still a good bedrock, isn't it? It's not to replace that, but there will be people. I mean, I immediately had 2 or 3 people that came to mind when I read this article and thought this would be a great thing to send them because it's absolutely relevant to their situation. Yeah. And then it's just another way of building trust, isn't it? And another way of looking and saying, look, if you get an email from me, you know that this is going to be something that's worthwhile opening. Yeah. And I think it's not just about some of the examples in the article were not just around emails, but curating experiences as well. Yeah. So there was a visit to an R&D factory that was just generated through commenting on social media, LinkedIn posts, and someone else's LinkedIn, start commenting, build that relationship, and then that led to an invite to an R&D factory, which led to a massive contract. And not everything is going to. Yeah, I think really the focus here should be on the spirit of helping other people. I think if you're just doing this to think, well, actually, the end result is I can get a sale out of someone. This whole process just becomes quite manipulative, really.
Yeah.
Whereas if you actually think, you know what, we can all help each other here. Like, I'd love to get an article from someone that's this would be really relevant for your business. Great.
Well, if they do it well enough that you really think that they've thought about you in that moment, then you're naturally going to feel a stronger relationship with that person. You want to pay that back somehow. You want to at least acknowledge it. That's how you build relationships, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think there was quite a few. There was 3 sort of areas they talked about to look at this, and one was around committing. So that whole piece around actually set aside the time to work on business development, rather than it becoming. And I guess whilst it's not necessarily business development, that's sort of what we've done with the podcast, isn't it? We have actually carved out time and said, right, we are going to be probably more disciplined than we ever thought we would be.
Yeah.
But once you get into the rhythm of doing it, it becomes natural.
Well, I think you're the same. I can't believe we've managed to do it for a year.
No.
I thought we might get to the 21 and think that's just been too disruptive, getting in the way of everything else. And yet the feedback we've had from everybody listening to it, has been enough to make us want to carry on. It's been very positive.
Yeah.
So committing is definitely...
Committing is
I can see that.
Making those connections with people, LinkedIn, networks, that type of thing, actually being present, and then creating opportunities through either sending invites to people for events, or here's an interesting article, those sorts of things. So that kind of model of commit, connect, create
value. Yeah. So I want to try and draw the parallels between that now and then the B2B research that the Harvard Business Review has also done, because like you say, a lot of what you just talked about really applies across businesses anyway. It doesn't have to be just professional services. I think it's just true that some of the characters that they identified in their model are more prevalent in professional services. You have that deep expert who just waits for the phone to ring, and the referrers and that type of thing. In B2B, they did a slightly different research based on the fact that they realized that most designing of solutions these days was being done before you contact a supplier. Okay. So whoever's got the problem, rather than ringing up a suite of suppliers saying, how would you suggest I solve this problem? And then, of course, they're engaging with you. There's probably enough out there online. You've got a pretty good guess. You can do a bit of research yourself and design it. Now, it's not always the case, but if that is the case, then the traditional B2B selling model of being the solution designer goes out the window. Because your value used to be, tell me a problem, I'll understand it, and then I'll come back with you with the solution.
Yeah.
So if they're already going out there with, I've got this problem and I know this is my solution, can you provide it? They're getting down the road of commoditizing what everybody does. Yeah. So this solution designer doesn't really have the same effect anymore. So instead, they talk about the fact that you need a very different approach to selling B2B. Yeah. And they come up with a really decent model, actually. And we'll probably put a link to it on the website so that people can see it. It's a kind of a flow chart. And they talk about the most successful salespeople are deliberately looking for disruptors. So if you've got someone who's already got a very stable buying process, they're putting the hard yards in of solution design, and they're really just looking for someone to do exactly what they say, almost like a make to print in engineering terms, then there's going to be a lot less opportunity for you to add value anyway, and it's going to be harder for you to distinguish yourself with the other people out there that make contact. Whereas if as a salesman you ask questions at the beginning that work out, is somebody open to radical new ways of doing things? And if at that early stage you know they are or they're not, focus your efforts accordingly. So deliberately put stuff out there that's challenging the status quo. You know, to start using AI in ways that maybe is a bit on the edge at the moment, but show what's possible. Challenge some received wisdoms. You know, challenge how you do an exhibition, or how you should use your CRM, or how you should use their product. And then the ones that you get that resonates with, they're more likely to be people inside a company that want to listen to new ways, and then they're going to follow you, and potentially you'll get
almost switch horses type of thing.
Yeah. So they do this flowchart of asking, if does somebody respond well when you put something provocative out there, and if they have some sort of healthy skepticism about it, that's a good start. But if they don't really want to engage too much, then they're likely to go into the deprioritize pot. And even those that do show an interest, try and gauge what their communication style is, because some of them might just be learning for academic purposes and wanting to do the same themselves and teach others, which is fine, keep them nurtured, but they're not likely to have opportunities straight away that you can deal with. Whereas those that want to try stuff, they want to get better, they want to improve, they almost want to, if it ain't broke, break it mentality. then they're the ones you've got to go and seek and find, because that's where their research showed that you're going to have much more success. So I thought that was a really interesting parallel to the professional services firm one, which is very different. Traditionally guarded, keep your contacts close, just be an expert. And instead of that, finding, almost being that curator for your contact database and helping them. It's now the parallel in the B2B world is throw some controversial stuff out there, show that you're thinking differently to everybody else, and then see who you find it's like-minded.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting, isn't it? I think it's again, it's that challenge and opportunity, isn't there? To say, how do you show that you think differently? How do you show that actually there may be another way of solving this problem? Or because, like I say, it's just there's so much information out there now. You've got to almost stay ahead of that.
I think you have to have a mentality as well that your market is infinite. Now, of course, it isn't. No one's market is infinite, but there's a lot of people out there that could well be buying what you do that you're not even talking to at the moment, and you're not even going to be getting close to talking to them if you're spending all your time talking to the wrong people. Yeah, the people that aren't going to buy from you. So what they say is one of their sort of headline bylines in the article is, don't try and sell to talkers. People who just want to talk about it all the time, they're going to sap your time. So this goes back to the Discovery Call podcast we did a few weeks ago. Early on in your discovery process, try and work out, is somebody just going to take up a lot of your time and not go anywhere? You need to fail fast if you can disqualify people. So they may be very interested in what you're talking about, but only, like I said earlier, from that point of telling other people about it, or to find ways of picking holes in your argument, or to object to it. Well, you've got to identify that early on, otherwise you'll spend a lot of energy finding out the hard way.
I just think about that as well. I mean, not harking on about our own podcast journey or whatever, but having those channels or having those kind of things like a podcast where you can almost, it's not quite a conversation, but rather than spending all that time talking to everybody, so if you've got a mechanism within the business like a podcast or some other form of blog or something where you can showcase expertise, people get to know you and all of that, you can then maybe short circuit some of, you can get to the heart of it when you're talking about a discovery call. You haven't almost got to spend so much time building relationships with people who are just going to, your talkers, as it were, because you can say, well, look, we've got a load of stuff. You want to get to know us, look at the podcast, look at the videos, look at the website, look at the blogs, look at all this other stuff.
Well, it's the whole point of inbound marketing, isn't it? The idea is the contacts are pre-qualified. They've read your stuff. They know what you're talking about. You have to tell me about it. Let's get on with it.
And then let's get on with it and, cut to the chase. So, so I guess, encouragement to do more of these sorts of things, isn't it? If you're an SME business owner, just do this stuff.
But even just thinking whether you agree with these characterizations that they've come up with, thinking about what style of seller are you and those around you. Who's more successful, who is less successful? What approach are they taking? Is it just that the more successful ones are working harder? Because the chances are that isn't going to be the most likely answer. It's going to be that they're doing it differently. At least if you've got that mindset and you're always looking not just within your own organization, but outside and in others, what's working for them? And maybe some of these ideas, even if you're not sure you agree with them or not, they fit into that category of it's a bit disruptive as an idea. Go and try it.
Go and try it
for yourself, see if it works.
Yes, absolutely. Be agile.
Be agile. So there you go. That's a good little summary of different selling styles in professional services and B2B. And we started off with our new feature of a little bit of small business news.
Small business news, yep. Stay off the phones, people.
Yeah.
Unless you're listening to the SME Growth Podcast, in which case.
Well, you can just listen, you don't have to scroll.
Exactly.
Stop the doom scrolling though. £20 billion a year or whatever. And that's just in work time. Imagine what you could be doing. So thank you very much again for listening to or watching the SME Growth Podcast from Wellmeadow. Every week we try and come up with some interesting stuff for various small, medium-sized businesses. And sometimes we have guests, and sometimes, like this week, we're just sharing with you some research that we found. So I hope you enjoyed that. Please tell your friends that we're here, share, and click the bell icon on your podcast platform so you know when the next one is dropping. And in the meantime, good luck with your business.